Back on the Newsfeed PM, and thanks for staying on. The ANC, in a statement, has slammed the recent policy directive by the Telecommunications Minister, Malatsi, to relax ownership rules for foreign telecommunications companies like Starlink. The directive would allow Starlink to operate in South Africa without adhering to the standard 30% local black ownership requirement. In a statement, the ANC insists that changing BEE laws requires a full parliamentary process, not a ministerial directive. It says the move reverses transformation gains and creates foreign dominance. The ANC has called on Parliament to hold the minister accountable while urging ICASA to refuse any directive inconsistent with the law. Let's get reaction on this pushback now. I'm joined by the Minister, Malatsi. Good to have you, Minister, and thank you very much for your time. The directive seems to have agitated your GNU partners to the point that they are saying there is no minister who may amend or suspend legislation through a policy directive. What are they misreading about your actions?
Thanks very much, Thabo, and good afternoon to Newzroom Afrika viewers. It's a very convenient interpretation of what ministers are allowed to do, particularly in terms of the provisions of the Electronic Communications Act. Policy directions are legal instruments which are available to whoever is the Minister of Communications in advancing national laws. Secondly, when coming to the crux of the issue, which is what I'm trying to resolve here, which is to harmonize the regulations on limitations of ownership, particularly in the telecommunications sector, with our broader economic empowerment rules, which are grounded in the Triple BEE Act, which was adopted by the country, which makes provision, Thabo, for equity equivalent investment programs as another entry level for multinationals that are seeking to enter into the South African market, who for a variety of reasons, including their own ownership structure, may not want to cede 30% of their ownership. This is a law, as many South Africans would be aware, that has been adopted even by our colleagues in the ANC, because there was a recognition that there would be instances wherein several companies, due to a multiplicity of factors, may seek another pathway other than the 30% ownership. You would notice that in different sectors, mining, agriculture, and even in the ICT sector, there are what are called sector codes. Yeah. These sector codes across the board were introduced by the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition in 2016. And they made provision for the recognition of equity equivalent investment programs. Yeah. Yeah. So the idea first that one, we are seeking to amend legislation is incorrect. It is based on a very expedient misinterpretation of the existing empowerment law, simply because what we are dealing with here, Thabo, if I were to be crude, is not any issue about ministerial powers or any issue about empowerment laws. It's simply because ideologically, our colleagues in the ANC have a different view on a policy matter. And I, as the minister, hold the view that the action that we have taken is consistent with the law, with the powers that have been granted to me, and most importantly, because I've also seen in some of the reaction that, there was no public consultation process. The first pronouncement we made on the policy directive was late last year, where I expressed an intention to do a policy directive, because in terms of the procedural process, that's what the law demands. First, there must be an intention of a policy directive, then followed by the actual policy directive that must be published for public comments, and we've done that part. resulting in 19,000 responses coming through. When we went and studied those responses, we realized that over 4,000 of those were duplicates, which is basically a matter of cut, copy, and pasting the same thing, and 15,000 were actually different just in substance. And 90% of the submissions favored the policy directive. There were two key points that were raised that were raised by both the supporters and even those who did not support the policy directive, which emphasized that in adopting the policy direction, there must be what is called regulatory parity. In simple terms, the same rules must apply to everyone. And these are rules about universal fees, any obligations around social obligations, and compliance in terms of tracking and measuring of the performance. And we've included that in the final policy.
So you are saying that that would have been enough. Is there in the procedural fairness and consultation process a requirement for consultation with other government departments?
No, there isn't. And it's important to also take a few steps back. One of the fundamental government guiding documents, in fact, that drives the agenda of this administration is what is called the medium-term development policy. The GNU adopted the medium-term development policy, which is a document that represents all the respective departments' goals, aspirations, and targets for the next 5 years for this administration. In there, the adoption of the full recognition of equity equivalent investment programs in the ICT sector is highlighted as one of this administration's priority goals.
What of the view that you have now circumvented Parliament, you have usurped the power of Parliament, you have no legislative authority, for example, to give an exemption to any company to the 30%, which is an act of this country?
First of all, it's a very populist propaganda, because it is not the truth, right? There is no amendment of an act here. We are saying that there was a regulation made in 2021, which was made by ICASA around limitations of ownership. And that regulation focused on equity as a means of ownership. And what we are saying is that that regulation on its own, when you read it in line with the provisions of the BBBE Act, when you read it together with the ICT sector codes, which were approved by the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, which still stipulates that one of the ways of investing in our country is through the pursuance of the equity equivalent programs. What we are seeking, which is the irony in all of this, we are seeking a harmonization of the regulations with what the Act says and what the sector codes say, so that there is consistent. And secondly, because this is a policy directive, right, it says ultimately the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa must consider the case that I'm putting towards them. The final determination is on them. And that is what the law provides for. Secondly, we went for a public comment session. As I indicated, 19,000 submissions landed into the inbox that we had set up for receiving the public input of this. And what is fascinating is the political parties that are responding now, none of those political parties made a submission to that process. And furthermore, in May, when we issued the draft policy directive, Parliament declared on one Friday evening that they are summoning me to appear before the portfolio committee. And I appeared before the portfolio committee because there is nothing clandestine about the approach that we have taken. There is nothing that says there must be an exception for favoring a particular company or not. We are saying that the regulations must be in harmony with the provisions of the BBBE Act, together with the provisions of the ICT sector codes, which recognizes that equity equivalent programs are a legitimate entry point for potential investment, and that individual applications for licenses, which is where the minister does not get involved, which is the sole responsibility of ICASA, will then be able to make a final determination based on what is being presented before itself.
Yeah, but they're saying, they're saying you are using a backdoor attempt to coerce ICASA into complying with an illegal instruction. You are saying, no, it will be ICASA's decision, but you've already compelled them through your directive to say, do this. There's even saying it's something similar to what Minister Mkhunu would have done to the police commissioner.
The irony in all of this is it is they who are trying to coerce ICASA into taking a position that aligns with their ideological outlook, right? It is not me that is trying to do that. The law says that the minister may issue policy directives that ICASA may consider. ICASA can make its own decision based on what we are being provided. And the other fundamental issue that I just want to address here, people or other politicians may not like the fact that the person taking the decisions isn't who they preferred, or the decisions that are being taken are inconsistent with their ideological outlook. But it doesn't mean that those decisions are wrong, nor does it mean that those decisions are illegal. Because if you went across sectors, equity equivalent programs recognized? Yes. So why is it a storm now when the argument says, given that this vehicle is in existence, it's recognized in our economic empowerment laws, which, funny enough, were adopted and advocated for and pushed by the ANC. And today they want to stand in opposite ends with the very same provisions that they advocated for.
It seems when you are acting on, or if even ICASA acts on these directives, it's almost certain that there will be multiple legal challenges. These actions would inevitably result in costly litigation when you could have just spoken to your partners and found consensus on this matter.
Look, it's not about that. The reality is there do and there will, particularly in a government of coalition, be instances where there is different interpretation of policy. And you know what? The best thing about our democracy and all the institutions that have been established for it is that if there is an instance of wrongdoing, there are sufficient institutions to do that. I am pretty sure that the provisions and the foundation with which we have acted on is legally sound and is consistent with the legal instruments of the country.
Might sound legally sound to you, and maybe others will challenge it, but does it align with the core transformation obligations of the country?
It does. And that's why I keep making reference to two aspects and maybe even beyond this interview, dedicate a lot of time into that, because the ICT sector codes, which stipulate instances in which the ICT sector must comply with, makes provision for equity equivalent investment programs. It is there.
But I mean, what about the ownership requirement? What about the ownership? It seems you are only looking at the equity equivalent, but you are disregarding the ownership, particularly by historically disadvantaged groups, which many are saying that is the core of the transformation.
No. That is one frame of it. We are saying that both options should permanently be on the table for a multinational that wants to enter the country, because that's what the law says. It's not saying one over the other. It says that there is the option of 30% local ownership or through the equity equivalent investment programs. That is why, Thabo, you have instances where even in the ICT sector, multinationals like Microsoft, IBM, and Microsoft and IBM are two of the immediate examples that I can come with, are currently operating in South Africa and actually have been through this equity equivalent investment vehicle.
Those who say the instructions of the minister, they undermine the rights of those in the historically disadvantaged group who want the ownership. That You have
No.
not taken them on board on this particular decision.
No,
And Parliament must certainly exercise oversight on this particular directive that you have given.
I am not disputing the fact that Parliament must exercise oversight in the same way that I'm empowered to be able to take actions that seek to advance the country's national laws. And the country's national economic empowerment laws make provision for equity equivalent investment programs to be an option that is on the table for potential multinational companies that seek to enter our markets.
Why is it such a priority for you that you make that room available? I mean, the EFF actually even accusing you of having received some funding. That maybe you have received some funding from Starlink, and now you've already received the money, and your hands are tied. You've got to go ahead and do this.
That's absolute rubbish. I can tell you for free now, I've never received any money from Starlink, and neither will I ever receive it. That's not the motivation with which we make decisions. And I think even in dealing with these things, because we're dealing with serious issues, in instances where such wild allegations are being made, he who alleges must prove, but we also hold the responsibility in the same way that you're holding me accountable now, to challenge them to produce that evidence so that we deal not with people's imaginations, but we deal with facts and not be distracted by people pandering to propaganda.
Minister, we appreciate your time. Let's leave it there. Much appreciated. That is the Minister of Telecommunications there, Malatsi.